It's become clear that terrorism has become a business for some international banks. It costs money to launch terrorist attacks, and the people who finance those terrorist attacks have to put their money somewhere. Lately, attorneys have been able to successfully obtain criminal conspiracy charges against global banking giant Credit Suisse and several other international banks that have been implicated in laundering terrorism money. In 2015, UBS AG paid millions of dollars to defend and settle what was characterized as violations of U.S. terrorism sanctions. They thought it was a good idea to process hundreds of transactions worth millions of dollars for entities that had been placed on terrorism blacklists. They had been warned about the terrorism blacklisting, but chose to ignore those warnings and take the money anyway. In 2016, HSB was sued for laundering money for cartel terrorists who murdered Americans. The case was initiated in Texas federal court and maintained that the London-based HSBC Bank had provided a continuous and systematic support of laundering cartel terrorist money. In 2012, Obama's then Attorney General Eric Holder fined HSBC almost $2 billion for engaging in cartel terrorist money laundering. As you'd expect with America's Department of Justice, no one went to jail. U.S. citizens can only sue a government that's been designated as a state sponsor of terrorism by the United States. That would include countries like Iran, Syria, North Korea, among others. But now, with new legislation that's been pushed through Congress, citizens can now sue Saudi Arabia for the role, for example, in funding the 9/11 terrorism attacks. More importantly, they can sue the banks that washed any money that may have been used for that mass murder. Terrorism cases against foreign governments have been hugely successful in the past. More than $10 billion has been received for victims. But now, more than ever, the focus is turning towards the banks that wash and distribute money to terrorists all over the globe who'd be unable to pull off many of their terrorist activities without that washed money. More information is becoming available that shows the steps of money laundering through international banks. The key is to show where the money originated, which international banks participated in washing and legitimizing that money, what part of a terrorist entity received that money, and what individuals were killed and crippled in the use of that money. A national confederation of some of the best trial lawyers in the country are now working together to sue countries and sue banks and individuals who've been part of an international terrorism money washing scheme that now has been underway for almost a decade.
Since 1996, the Foreign Sovereign Immunities Act has authorized U.S. courts to order state sponsors of terrorism, namely Iran, North Korea, Cuba, and Syria, and previously Libya, Iraq, and Sudan, to pay monetary damages to terrorism victims. Courts have since awarded an estimated $150 billion against these states. Judgments against Iraq were paid through liquidating Iraqi assets frozen pursuant to the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, prior to vesting the remaining Iraqi assets in the United States for the Development Fund for Iraq. Some judgment holders against other state sponsors of terrorism receive compensation through Section 2002 of the Victims of Trafficking and Violence Protection Act, or by attaching frozen assets pursuant to Section 201 of the Terrorism Risk Insurance Act. But due to the scarcity of these states' attachable assets in the United States, the vast majority of terrorism judgments remain outstanding. The Islamic Republic of Iran has been recognized as a state sponsor of terrorism since 1984. Since that time, Iran has been found liable for supporting terrorist attacks against Americans and others across the globe. This includes the provision of weapons, funding, and training to groups like Al-Qaeda and Hezbollah, who, working with local insurgents, have waged a sustained campaign of terror in Iraq, resulting in the injuries and deaths of thousands of U.S. service members. One of those injured service members is Staff Sergeant Travis McCody Strong. On November 27, 2006, 29-year-old Staff Sergeant Strong and his platoon were conducting a patrol operation in Baghdad when his armored Stryker vehicle was struck by an explosively formed penetrator. Sergeant Strong suffered the traumatic amputation of his legs, a collapsed lung, damage to his throat from smoke inhalation, and PTSD. He endured numerous surgeries and medical procedures over a period of several years to treat his injuries, and he had to relearn to walk with the aid of prosthetics. Sergeant Strong was attacked and injured by an Iranian-supported terrorist organization with an Iranian-supplied EFP. In this insider-exclusive network TV special, Seeking Justice for U.S. Victims of State-Sponsored Terrorism, Sergeant Travis McCody Strong's story. Our news team is on location in Pensacola, Florida, to meet with Christopher Paulos, the lead counsel at Levin Papantonio Rafferty, and his client, Sergeant Travis Strong, who are seeking to hold Iran responsible for the injuries suffered by Sergeant Strong. Most of the evidence needed to prove these facts is possessed by the U.S. Department of Defense, who has been less than cooperative in providing veterans access to the evidence to support their claims. Sergeant Strong is trying to prove the facts of the case that happened nearly 15 years ago and thousands of miles away in a foreign country. Iran, the main defendant, has ignored the case and deprived Sergeant Strong of the opportunity to conduct discovery against it and cross-examine witnesses. Sergeant Strong is fighting for his legal rights afforded him by the country for which he fought and sacrificed greatly. He is now fighting to hold the world's most prolific state sponsor of terrorism responsible for thousands of deaths and injuries suffered by U.S. forces in Iraq. Sergeant Strong desires to ensure that those who choose to support terrorism and sow violence and discord in the world are held to account. By bringing attention to the source of funds and weapons used against U.S. soldiers in Iraq, Sergeant Strong's case may shed light on the truth of the sacrifices made by him and his fellow soldiers and the complexities of seeking peace in the Middle East. By seeking to hold countries like Iran responsible for supporting terrorism, Sergeant Strong's case will discourage such deplorable conduct and result in recompense to those who were injured or killed by Iranian-backed terrorists in Iraq. This is the Insider Exclusive live from Pensacola, Florida. It is my great pleasure to introduce Chris Paulos to the show. Welcome to the show, Chris.
Thank you.
Tell our audience a little bit about your law firm and what type of law your firm practices.
I am a partner at the Levin Papantonio Rafferty law firm here in Pensacola, Florida, and we are solely a plaintiff and consumers trial firm. We represent consumers of medical devices, pharmaceuticals, and other groups of plaintiffs in cases against large multinational corporations, foreign sovereign governments, and other institutional defendants who have wronged large groups of people.
Mm-hmm. And I'm glad you brought that up about the foreign governments, because that's why we're here today. We are here covering a case that you're representing a retired former staff sergeant, Sergeant Strong, and it's against the sovereign state of Iran, correct?
That's right. We've sued the Islamic Republic of Iran for sponsoring terrorism, specifically terrorist attacks in Iraq against U.S. soldiers and U.S. nationals who were a part of the UN-sanctioned peacekeeping mission there.
And tell us a little bit about Sergeant Strong, your client. What type of individual is he? He's an amazing guy, but I'll let you tell the story.
Sergeant Strong is an incredibly strong and resilient individual. He was a combat soldier in Iraq. and served with distinction. He was attacked by a terrorist organization while in Iraq and severely wounded in that attack. He was very lucky to survive, and since the attack, he has had to determine how to live his life as a double amputee and somebody who bears the scars, both physically and psychologically, of an incredibly violent terrorist attack using a weapon of mass destruction that was intended to kill him and those that he was with.
And what was the name of this weapon that he was hit with?
Sergeant Strong was riding in an up-armored vehicle called a Stryker vehicle in the Shula neighborhood of Baghdad in 2006. And at night, almost midnight, he was struck by what's called an explosively formed penetrator, or EFP, which is a highly sophisticated roadside bomb that was developed by Hezbollah with the support of Iran and deployed with particular groups in Iraq against our soldiers.
Okay, now, when you say was developed by Iran, obviously you have to provide the evidence to this. And from what I've read, some of that evidence is with the Department of Defense, correct?
That's true.
And from what I've read, you're having some difficulty getting that information. Is that true?
In our case, we have requested the certain documents from the Department of Defense to establish the relationship of Iran with certain organizations and individuals in Iraq, and to further establish the flow of financing, weapons, raw material, and operational support. The fact that Iran was supporting particular groups in Iraq has now been very well established and has been openly announced by our government and others in sanctioning Iran for its conduct in supporting particular terrorist organizations. But in getting information from the government that substantiates or supports counterterrorism financing sanctions or other U.S. economic sanctions against Iran, we have found that the government is claiming particular state secrets privileges on certain information.
Is that because they're intelligence documents? Does that revolve around the whole thing, or what?
Yeah, most of the time, the information that we're seeking has intelligence gathered information in it, or within the summaries or the photographs are considered classified and have to undergo a declassification review because of the source of that information either being an active intelligence source or had been an active intelligence source.
Now, Iran is claiming, as some of these foreign governments claim, that they are protected by sovereign immunity. But there are exceptions to that. And what are the exceptions?
Initially, all state sovereigns are immune from suit in the United States courts. And that is a benefit or a right that we also enjoy in other countries' court systems as well. The United States Foreign Sovereign Immunities Act, the law that provides for sovereign immunity for other foreign sovereigns, has exceptions to it. You will not be immune from lawsuits in the United States if you are a state sponsor of terror and participate in extrajudicial killings, kidnappings, hostage-taking, or torture. U.S. nationals who are the victims of those types of conduct can seek justice in U.S. courts against state sponsors of terror.
So your case, when you represent Sergeant Strong, is not only on behalf of him, but anybody that was injured as a result of the same method, right?
We represent a large number of victims that were injured in a similar way as Sergeant Strong. So yeah, we filed hundreds of these suits against Iran for a large number of U.S. service members.
Where are you in this particular case in terms of where is it? Is it scheduled to go to trial soon, or what?
So we are presently preparing to present the evidence for Sergeant Strong's case to the U.S. District Court in the District of Columbia. The court is obligated to stand in the role of fact finder and to weigh the evidence that's presented to determine it, to the court's satisfaction if we have proved the allegations and the elements of our claims. So we are imminently going to be presenting the evidence for Sergeant Strong and the other victims that are named in that suit.
And often, as we talked about before the show, the defendant does not show up, nor do they have any lawyers that represent them that show up, right?
Iran particularly has chosen a specific litigation strategy, which is to default on cases alleging that it is a sponsor of terrorism. Iran will frequently appear and defend itself in commercial disputes or other disputes that require our court system or others. It will defend itself in the press and through anything other than a courtroom. But yes, it's chosen to deprive our clients the opportunity to face it in court by defaulting. Nevertheless, issues of comedy and respect for foreign sovereign dignity and rights requires that our U.S. court systems measure the evidence, weigh the evidence, and confirm that it satisfies the evidentiary standards in our court system to find judgment against Iran.
But they do show up for appeals, don't they?
They can, and they have. Certainly when judgments have been entered against them, or when their property is being seized to satisfy judgments that have been levied against them, they and their lawyers have appeared to try to disrupt that process.
Today, we are fortunate to have your client with us, so let's bring Sergeant Strong on now. It is my great pleasure to introduce Sergeant Strong to the show. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
I'm a big admirer of you. I looked at all of the videos online and the appearances that you have made, and you're an amazing individual. Everybody says that, you know that. Tell our audience what happened to you on November 27th, 2006 in Iraq.
On November 27th, 2006, my unit was doing a presence patrol in the district of Shula in Baghdad. We were driving, just looking for anybody that was out. Drove down a street that we drove down a million times, and unfortunately that night on that road, they placed an EFP device on that road. The EFP, explosively formed penetrator, went through my striker that I was in. I was the VC. It blew right through where I was sitting. It took my right leg off instantly, and my left leg was still there at the time, but it was pretty badly damaged. Funny thing is, though, is that I didn't feel any pain. I didn't see any blood. I didn't even at first know that I was even hit. I didn't feel anything wrong. I've been in blast prior before, so I knew exactly what happened. I knew exactly that we were hit. And it just kind of, after a few minutes, it just kind of dawned on me like something's wrong. I'm hurt. And I knew I had to get to the back hatch, which is inside the striker. The back hatch comes out. That's where we kind of exit out of the vehicle. I knew I had to get to the back hatch, and I got off my seat, and that's when I kind of blacked out and faded out. And that was it.
So then you were medevaced.
They put me into a different striker, got me stable as much as they could, put a tourniquet in my right leg, put a tourniquet in my left leg because it was bleeding out pretty bad. Got me as stable as they could. They drove me to the field hospital on Camp Liberty, which was on by up the Baghdad International Airport. Got me stable there, and then took me over to the green zone in Baghdad, and then got me stable at the green zone at the hospital in the green zone.
So they basically stopped the bleeding. And you are unaware of what has happened to you at this time?
At that time, yes. So I blacked out pretty quick, probably because of just shock and everything else. But I can still hear, which was the weird thing. So I was hearing people yelling at me. I was hearing people say, breathe. I was hearing people say, hang in there. And when they were saying breathe, it was funny because I was trying to breathe, and I felt like I wasn't getting any air. Come to find out, Yeah, my lung collapsed, and so I wasn't getting any air. So then, like I said, they got me stable. They brought me to the field hospital on Camp Liberty. From there, I couldn't see, I was blacked out, but I can hear still. I remember them asking me questions and asking me my name and just all kinds of stuff. I remember them cutting off my clothes and them just talking to me. But and then I kind of faded out, and then I woke up the next day in the Baghdad hospital.
When did you realize the extent of your injuries?
That next day. Of course, I was pretty drugged up at the time. I woke up the first time, my battalion commander, battalion chaplain, all the kind of high up people were in my room, and they were all telling me that I lived, that the enemy didn't get me. I was still pretty dazed at that time. I kind of just fell back asleep. I woke up the second time, and my whole platoon was in my room. And that was a very somber moment because I knew it was the last time I was going to see these guys again, the last time that I was going to serve with them again. And it was at that point, too, that I realized that both my legs were gone. And so that was about the first time that I really noticed that, well, they're gone.
You know, oftentimes when we grow up, we have plans for our future. You had been in the Army, then you re-enlisted, correct? And this was during the re-enlistment time, correct?
It was, so, like, I joined the Army in 97, was at a unit in Italy, got out in 2000, tried civilian life again for just a little bit, but then after 9/11 happened, I was like, I got to go back in. So 9/11 hit, I rejoined the Army after that, and that's when I got sent to Fort Lewis, Washington. So we were part of the 1st Stryker Brigade.
So you were probably thinking you were going to be a 30-year man, right? Retire and that sort of thing. Your career was going to be in the Army. Now, all of a sudden, things have dramatically changed. What's going through your mind?
At that point in time, I was pretty lost. I didn't know what I was going to do. I was grateful to be alive, of course. But at that time, it's like my whole drive, my whole identity, everything was serving. And that was taken away in an instant. And that was extremely hard. And I mean, even to this day, there are moments where that is hard. The guys that I served with, the people that I've created bonds with, my future career, like I said, I planned on staying in, at least doing the full 20. And I was well on my way to doing that. And that was just gone in an instant. And so, of course, it brings up all kinds of things. It's like, how am I going to live my life? What is my life going to look like from here on out? Am I going to be able to do the same things that I used to do? Like, how is this going to work?
And how did it work? And how did you answer those questions?
Again, at first it was hard trying to find who I am again, separating myself from the military and from that life. That's a big part of who I was. And so to not be that anymore was hard. To be back in civilian life was hard. To be back in a place where when I was serving, I was somebody who was important. I was somebody who people looked up to, who people listened to. And then here I am injured and I'm out and all that's gone. No one knows who I am. No one cares. I'm just me again. So I had to make my own identity. And there came a point a few years after I was injured where I kind of made a decision of either moving forward in life and trying to live the best life that I can, or just giving up. And I'm not a person that wants to give up. So I try and strive to live my best life as best as I can. And I do everything. I try to inspire people, to show people that despite an injury, despite something catastrophic that happens to you, you can still live your life to the fullest. And you can do things like climb mountains, and you can do things like do Tough Mudders and do incredible things that people think that is impossible.
Right. And I got to tell you, from what I've learned of you, you've gone the extreme route. You're an extreme guy. But that's very beneficial because you're an inspiration. I mean, tell Iranians some of the things you've done. Climb mountains, Pikes Peak, right? I mean, When you were thinking about that, did people say to you, "You're crazy for trying"?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm kind of a crazy person. I like to do really extreme stuff. I like to push myself both mentally and physically. I love to push those boundaries to see how far I can actually go. Because I mean, you can always go further than what you always think you can do. So, I mean, I've climbed the Manitou Incline, which is in Colorado Springs. I've done that about 6 times now. It's about 2,768 stairs going up a mountain. Rated extreme trail. So I've done that a couple times. And then from there, I've actually gone up Pikes Peak, hopped on my hands, no prosthetic devices, no nothing, just hopped all the way up. I've done things like a 100-mile veteran hike from Denver all the way down to Colorado Springs. Me and a bunch of veterans did that to raise awareness for PTSD. And that was on a bike chair. We did 100 miles. I've done things, Tough Mudder, Spartan races. Just recently, I attempted to climb Mount Kilimanjaro, and I got to the 3rd day. Some complications with that, and I didn't quite make it up to the top, but I'm going to be going back next year to accomplish that feat.
I wish you success in that. I understand they don't have any snow on Mount Kilimanjaro.
They do. No, there was some up there. There was a little bit, yeah.
So you work with other veterans. You must be an inspiration to other veterans who are also injured too, because they see what you can do, and they say, why can't I too, right?
Exactly.
That must bring you a great deal of satisfaction.
It does. It gives me a sense of purpose again. It gives me a sense of kind of hope in that I'm doing something good. Because I mean, anybody who joins the service or any kind of a service related job, that can be police force, firefighters, paramedics, military, they're in their heart, they want to serve. And that just doesn't go away once it's, you're out of that job. You still want to serve. And that's kind of how I am too. I still want to serve. I still want to be of service. And so this is, I found doing the things that I'm doing and trying to inspire people has kind of given me a sense of who I am again. And just knowing that I'm helping other people, it makes me feel good.
Right. The reason we're here today is you have traveled the same character arc that a lot of people have traveled, where they initially are a victim, then they become a survivor, then they become an advocate. And one of the reasons we are here today with your lawyer is because you are being represented by this law firm in trying to hold Iran responsible for all of the terrorist acts that they do and causing injuries to people like yourself, right? What sense of satisfaction does that give you participating in this legal action?
It's huge. I mean, to be able to put kind of a face to who injured me, to kind of know and go after the people. Because I mean, when I was injured, you really don't know. You're just fighting, and you really don't know exactly who actually hit you or who actually is fighting against you. But, to kind of put a face behind that, kind of put a group behind that.
Well, you're an inspiration to all of us. And anything else you want to say on behalf of the law firm?
I am extremely grateful for them. They're doing an incredible job. They're helping a lot of vets, and to get the recognition and just everything that they deserve.
All right. Well, I want to thank you for being on the show.
Thank you.
You mentioned earlier the Foreign Sovereign Immunities Act, right?
That's right.
Tell our audience a little bit about what's that mean.
So the Foreign Sovereign Immunity Act is what grants sovereign immunity to foreign countries. The audience is probably most familiar with the phrase diplomatic immunity, meaning that somebody that's got diplomatic immunity is immune from arrest or civil prosecution here in the United States for their conduct. And that's generally the rule, that a foreign sovereign can't be held liable civilly or in some instances criminally for its conduct because of their presence here in the United States. There are exceptions to that. There is not a blanket immunity. Certain conduct has been determined to be so abhorrent that it cannot be considered immune from prosecution. The first layer of that would be terrorism, extrajudicial killings, torture, kidnapping, and the like. That type of conduct by a foreign sovereign falls under the purview of the exceptions to Foreign Sovereign Immunity Act, and also to a recently passed law called the Justice Against State Sponsors of Terrorism Act, or JASTA, that was passed in 2016, that permits victims of terrorism that's committed here in the United States by a foreign sovereign to bring suit against that foreign sovereign here in the United States.
And that was just passed 2016.
In fact, it was passed over President Obama's veto in November of 2016, the only time that there was a congressional override of Obama's veto power. It was a bipartisan bill passed and intended to allow U.S. nationals who are victims of international terrorism within the United States to sue countries that supported terrorists that committed that attack. The most familiar event that the audience will know is 9/11. That law now allows 9/11 victims to sue Saudi Arabia for the 9/11 attacks, for Saudi Arabia's support of the hijackers and connection to the events that day.
Are there any cases pending in court?
Yes, there are.
But they have not been adjudicated yet, correct?
They have not been adjudicated yet.
Okay. Have any banks been held liable for U.S. military injuries for terrorism?
Yes, banks have been found liable for materially supporting terrorism here in the United States. Banks who have facilitated transactions on behalf of terrorist front organizations or terrorist organizations themselves, banks that have conspired with known terrorist organizations or terrorist front companies to facilitate financial transactions that have then been used to support terrorist acts have been found liable for their involvement in those events.
Who is entitled to bring a claim? Not only soldiers, military people, but also U.S. contractors, right?
Under the Sovereign Immunities Act, the U.S. nationals, members of the military, and employees of the government, if they are a victim of an extrajudicial killing, a terrorist attack, torture, kidnapping at the time that they hold that status.
How can folks who now become aware of their potential claims against Iran or any sovereign state for the same reason, how can they get a hold of you?
Well, we're online. They can reach out to us through our website, or they can call our office directly. We're happy to evaluate anyone's claim that they have, if they want us to determine if we can represent them in a matter involving Iran or any other entity, individual, organization that supports directly or indirectly terrorism.
You get a lot of people contact you, well-known firm. How do you select the cases you take on?
I'm proud to say that the Levin Papantonio Rafferty law firm, particularly with the leadership of Mike Papantonio, has chosen to take cases that many other law firms may either not feel they're capable of handling or decide not to handle because it's not a traditional type of case that you would see here in the United States. Our firm routinely takes cases that you refer to as legacy cases, cases that are the right case to bring. They are intended to affect lasting change on behalf of the clients that we represent. It's not an economic decision for our firm, it's a moral decision for our firm to take on a case that we believe should be brought in order to right a wrong. And frequently those cases push the boundary of the law, they push the capabilities of lawyers and are considered cutting edge. And that's what we pride ourselves in.
It's a good thing your law firm's doing this. Not too many law firms can afford to do this. And we wish you success with this case and others related to it. Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. You can get more information about our guest and the issues at insiderexclusive.com.